Homeless man gives last dollar to hungry girl. Days later, his life changes forever. It was a bitter Tuesday afternoon in November, and Thomas sat on the cold concrete bench near the corner of Maple and 7th, the worn cardboard sign propped against his knee. Anything helps. God bless. The wind bit through his thin coat, one he'd found abandoned in a donation bin last winter. He pulled it tighter around his frame, fingers aching from the cold, knuckles red and dry. People walked past him like he was invisible, eyes fixed on their phones, earbuds in, coats zipped high. He didn't blame them. After 8 months of sleeping in shelters and alleyways, Thomas had grown used to being part of the city's background noise. He had exactly $1 in his pocket, creased, soft from age, and likely the last he'd see for days. Thomas had held on to it not for food, not even for coffee, but simply because it made him feel human. Something about having some money, even $1, was different than having none at all. It was hope folded in his pocket. He thought of his life before this. The job at the auto plant, the apartment with the peeling green paint, the Sunday phone calls to his mother. He wasn't supposed to end up here. No one ever thinks they will. That's when he noticed her. A little girl, maybe 9 or 10 years old, sitting on the edge of the sidewalk across the street. Her knees were drawn up to her chest, arms wrapped around them. She wore a faded pink hoodie, much too thin for the weather, and dirty sneakers with holes near the toes. She wasn't crying, but there was a stillness in her, a hollow kind of quiet that only people who've gone too long without comfort seem to carry. Her eyes scanned the sidewalk, not for someone, but for something, anything. Thomas watched her for a while. Then he stood up. He walked across the street slowly, unsure what he was even going to say. The girl looked up, startled for a moment, then relaxed when she saw his kind face. He crouched beside her. "You okay, sweetheart?" She nodded quickly like she'd rehearsed it. "You hungry?" This time the nod came slower. Thomas reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his dollar. He looked at it, then looked at her. "Take this," he said, holding it out. The girl hesitated. "It's okay," he added. "You need it more than I do." She took it with trembling fingers. "Thank you," she whispered. Thomas smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't show in the mouth, but warms the eyes. "There's a little deli down the street. They've got warm soup. You tell Mr. Sal I sent you?" Her eyes widened a little. "He knows you?" Thomas chuckled softly. "He's seen me around. Go on now." The girl stood up, clutching the dollar like it was a golden ticket. She looked back once before walking down the sidewalk, and Thomas gave a small wave. Then he sat back on his bench, cold and empty-pocketed, but somehow lighter in the chest. The next morning he didn't see her, nor the next day, but on the third day something strange happened. He was dozing lightly when a black SUV pulled up to the curb in front of him. A sharply dressed man stepped out, wearing a long gray coat and polished shoes. He looked out of place, like a Wall Street executive lost in the wrong neighborhood. "Are you Thomas?" the man asked. Thomas squinted, unsure if this was real or some odd dream. "Yeah, who's asking?" The man smiled slightly. "My name's Adrian Walker. I'm with the Franklin Foundation." "Foundation?" Adrian nodded. "We support community outreach programs across the city. Yesterday, one of our volunteers told us about you." "I don't understand," Thomas said cautiously. Adrian pulled out his phone and tapped it. "There's a little girl named Lila. She came into one of our mobile kitchens 2 days ago, said a homeless man gave her his last dollar and told her to find Mr. Sal at the deli. Sal called us, said you've been around his store for a while, never asked for anything, always polite. Lila said you helped her when no one else did." Thomas's brow furrowed. "Is she all right?" "She's safe. Social services are working on getting her into a foster program. But she didn't stop talking about you. Said you were the first person who looked at her like she mattered." Thomas looked down, the weight of it settling in his chest. Adrian continued, "We don't get stories like that every day, and we don't ignore them when we do." He held out an envelope. "This is for you." Thomas opened it. Inside was a prepaid hotel voucher for 2 weeks, a meal stipend, and a referral card to a job placement program. I don't know what to say, Thomas murmured. Say you'll show up tomorrow morning. We've got a pair of boots and a clean shirt waiting for you. You deserve another shot. For the first time in months, Thomas slept on a bed that night. A real bed with sheets and warm water, and a light he could turn off with a switch. He stood in front of the mirror in the hotel bathroom, staring at his reflection. The man staring back looked tired, weathered, but not broken. Something in his eyes had changed. The next day, he walked into the job placement center with the card in his hand. He was nervous, unsure, but he held on to the thought of Lila, how she'd looked at him when she took that dollar, like he was more than what he'd become. They gave him a maintenance job at a nonprofit shelter. Nothing fancy, fixing pipes, painting walls, replacing broken locks. But it was honest work, good work. People smiled when they saw him. 3 weeks later, Adrian returned. Thomas, he said, we're expanding our outreach team. We want people who understand what it's like out there, people who've lived it. We'd like you to train for a caseworker role. Thomas stared at him, stunned. You're serious? Adrian nodded. Lila didn't just change your life. You changed hers. Now you can help others do the same. Months passed. Thomas got certified, moved into a small apartment near the community center. He even started volunteering at the mobile kitchen where Lila had first appeared. People came to him for help now, people who saw his eyes and knew he understood. And then one rainy afternoon, he saw her again. Lila. She was standing outside the center with her foster mother, holding a small paper bag in her hand. When she saw him, her face lit up. Hi, Mr. Thomas. He smiled and crouched down. Hey there, kiddo. She handed him the bag. Inside was a hand-drawn picture. 2 stick figures sitting on a bench, one handing the other a dollar bill. Underneath, in crooked handwriting, it said, Thank you for seeing me. Thomas didn't speak for a long moment. His throat tightened, eyes burning. He ruffled her hair gently. You're welcome, he said softly. And just like that, everything made sense. Not every act of kindness changes the world, but sometimes it changes a world. And sometimes that's enough to shift everything. Sometimes the smallest gift, a single dollar, a shared moment, a kind word, isn't small at all. It's the start of something bigger. And maybe, just maybe, it's how we save each other.